Hi, I'm Kison with Fundology. I'm here with Hanna with Schenck M&A Solutions, a boutique investment bank based out of Milwaukee. How are you, Ann?
Great. Good morning, Kison.
And so one of the things unique about your practice, it's tied in with the CPA firm. Could you give us a little overview about that?
Yes, we operate very much like a boutique investment bank. We are a practice that is embedded into a larger CPA firm. Schenck is one of the top 50 firms in the country, yet all of our accountants are here in Wisconsin, so we have over 500 employees. And I run the practice, a investment banking practice that runs very much like a boutique practice, except that we leverage and we use the resources of a large accounting firm to better our process. So the idea is to get a higher quality process because of our deep resources in tax, resources in diligence. We do a lot of seller diligence prior to going to market. And we leverage that kind of depth of experience to get a better quality deal.
Great. Now, Ann, a few days ago, we spoke about the challenges in working with multi-generational families. And you had a really good transaction, I think you were closed recently, that outlined it. Could you tell me a little bit more about it?
Yes, we had a transaction where the founders were ready for an exit. There were two generations in the family, the founding generation and then the next generation. And the founding generation, one of the two founders had passed several years ago, and the remaining founder was ready for an exit. So as we went into the deal, we had multiple interests to take care of, and also kind of that challenge of the personal and the business type of interactions and relationships that were part of the whole deal.
Now, how did you source this transaction?
We found this transaction through a business consultant. We were referred in, and we were one of three firms that pitched this deal. We find generally most deals of any significant size, unfortunately, they're not just handed to us by an attorney or a consultant, which would be wonderful. Generally, they look at a number of firms, and you need to pitch and then win the deal.
Why they choose you?
I think they chose us because they felt like we saw the value in their company. This is a very unique company. It had some challenges as far as earnings. The earnings were good, but they were not trending well. But they had some great products, and I think they saw us as having really seeing the value of the intellectual property they have, really seeing the value in their brand recognition, their brand presence. It was a 40-year-old company who had built a wonderful reputation, and I believe we got chosen just because of our passion for how great we thought this company was.
Well, what did the company do exactly?
It is a medical device company, a manufacturer in the Midwest, and they also have several locations in Europe.
Okay, great. And what was your sales process like?
Our sales process, it was a standard type process. It was a private auction type process. It lasted about a year. And we contacted a number of buyers, both strategic and private equity, family office buyers, and we went through the full process and into diligence.
And then, could you tell me a little bit about the buyer?
The buyer that we ended up choosing, that the owners ended up choosing, was a strategic buyer. As this deal progressed, I had mentioned that there was some challenges to this, and what happens, consistent with what often happens in a deal, is earnings got a little bit soft as we went through the process, and so midway through the process, we realized that we were going to have problems with a financial buyer, which we had financial buyers in the mix. Because our earnings were starting to trend downwards quite a bit. And even though the value of the company was still there, because the main value was in the intellectual property and in the brand recognition. Sometimes that's hard to show that value and retain that value with the financial buyer. So we did some in-flight adjustments, and we focused more on strategic buyers. And so the ultimate buyer was a strategic. It was not a competitor, although we talked to many of the competitors. It ended up being a complementary type company where they were adding the product lines of this company that I sold onto their current offering, and they were expanding their entire offering.
Great. Now, because of the financial decline, was there a valuation gap?
There was, and there could have been. There could have been a tremendous gap with a more financially motivated buyer. We were able to retain our value because our value was based mostly on the intellectual property and the brand name. So the strategic buyer that we ended up going with had a tremendous amount of confidence that, despite the fact that earnings were trending downwards, that would change significantly after close, and that their input and their management as buyers and what the synergies they could bring, they were pretty confident that they could turn it around. And the deal closed recently, so I can't report on what's happened, but I'm very confident that this is going to be a home run for the strategic buyer. In fact, this is a great deal because it was truly a win-win. My sellers got top value. If you look at the value, or if you look at the deal from a strictly financial perspective, you'd say, wow, did you get a tremendous dollar value for that company? But my buyers, I'm convinced they are absolutely going to hit a home run, and they're going to look back in 2 years and say, this was such a good economic decision for us. They'll have a payback in a very short period of time.
Great. How were the negotiations?
They were, I think negotiations are always tough. I think that's a standard answer. I can't think of a deal where I could say, wow, negotiations were just easy. We agreed on everything.
Was there a lot of back and forth? Did you start off high and have to really drive the price down? Or?
There was a lot of back and forth. There was a small adjustment on price because of the earnings situation. We had quite a bit of back and forth because we had some different objectives to meet with our different generations of the family that were in the business. We had the founder who was looking for an exit and looking for an event and wanted maximum value, as you can imagine, but also wanted to retain the name in the industry. And we had the second generation who had a desire to stay with the company, and their focus was more on what is this buyer going to do with the company after the sale. I want to stay and continue on with the business. I want it to go in a certain direction. And so I want the buyer who's going to take it in the direction that I'd like to see it.
Yeah, that sounds like a challenge working with multiple owners on that. How did you bridge those differences?
Well, ultimately, I guess at the end of the day, it's hard to do. And what's the saying? You can't please everyone. But what we tried to do was please most of the people. And ultimately, you look at who your shareholder is, right? And who you're working for, which is ultimately the shareholder. And it's the majority shareholder. That's who you're working for. But then secondly, you have a lot of compromises. Like for instance, maybe you have a second generation who wants to stay with the business. And so what they would like to see is they would like to see no changes in the business, and no changes from the buyer, in the business as it goes forward. And they like to see lifetime employment because that's basically what they were guaranteed prior to sale. No buyer is going to come in and tell you that they won't make any changes and they'll guarantee lifetime employment. But what we can do is bring in a buyer who has the intent of, say, keeping the company in the current city it's at, and bring in a buyer who's willing to sign a 3 or 5 year employment contract. So we can't guarantee lifetime employment, but we can get employment contracts in place where they will at the very least have positions for the next 3 to 5 years. And if, even if the positions, if they're released from the positions, they'll get the compensation for the next 3 to 5 years.
Great. How did the due diligence go?
The due diligence was very long and arduous and difficult. This is a company who has a tremendous amount of intellectual property, and we were dealing with a strategic buyer. And a strategic buyer tends to, number one, they know the industry, so they know to a great degree what they're looking for, and everything is of interest to them, and everything is important to them. So they turn over everything 2 and 3 times, and so it was a long diligence process. We still held it to 90 days, which was difficult to do, but they had a lot of resources, and they brought in some good professional teams to help them on the accounting end and on the IP and on the environmental end of things.
What was the most difficult part in managing due diligence?
I think it was just the volume of the amount of materials needed, and the fact that these particular sellers did not want to disclose to anyone in the company that the sale was imminent. So we were working with a very small group of people to gather up all this information, and that's always a challenge.
Great. Now, did you use any tools to manage that?
We used a virtual data room, and that was used for diligence, and it was also used for disclosure schedules by both attorneys to share information.
Great. What would you say are some lessons learned from this transaction, Ann?
Lessons learned. I guess the first lesson in this situation was to follow up on every detail. As it turned out, the buyer that ended up winning this deal was a buyer who had originally told us no. No, he wasn't interested. He was too busy. He didn't want to see this deal. And as we got in, and we got in deeper and closer to calling for letters of intent, we realized we may have an earnings problem. And a few of our other buyers were financial. And so we went back through our strategic buyers and were able to touch this gentleman again, who said, you know what, let me think about this again. Yes, I am interested. And so we brought him in last minute on a holiday for a site visit so he could get into the process before letters of intent were due, and ended up being the best buyer. So if I guess looking at every detail, checking off every box twice really paid off for us in this respect.
Great. Were there any unusual aftermaths or other opportunities that sprung up from this transaction?
Not yet. I did get a request from the buyer during the process to represent them on another company that they wanted to buy. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that because it's a conflict of interest. Since they were my buyer on this current deal and it hadn't closed yet, I was not able to represent them, but encouraged them to wait until we closed, and then I'd be happy to represent them after that. So far, that's it.
Great. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share some insights with us on this recent deal you closed. Could you tell us a little bit about what type of transactions your firm looks for?
We are generalists. We operate in the lower middle market. So we're looking at deals with revenues generally less than $100 million. Generally, EBITDAs run between $2 and $10 million. And we are looking in really every industry, although we tend to do a lot of deals in manufacturing, in distribution, in business services, and food and agriculture, because we're in Wisconsin. So although we say we don't have a specialty, we kind of do in those areas.
Great. Thanks for your time, man.
Very good. Thank you.